Hi there. This isn't the video I mentioned in my community post for anyone that saw it, but this is something else I had thought of earlier last week and I had to do something about it. Before we start though, I need like a better representation of myself that better suits my current fixation. Give me a moment. Awesome. Anyway, the narrator is someone I feel kinda defines Thomas's storytelling. In every story of the Railway series and original TV series, they're always present and always telling the story. But who is the narrator exactly? And I'm not talking about the voice actors or readers from throughout the years, I mean the narrator as a character. For the most part, the narrator is someone we don't really put a lot of thought into. They can be seen as merely the disembodied voice that tells the story, but I think there's a bit more to them than what we think. Nothing super deep, just something, you know? This is something that randomly sparked in my mind when I was about to go to bed, and after I woke up, I began to write about this and think about it a bit more. I didn't think there would be much of a clear answer to this, but surprisingly, there are some things that allude to the narrator as a character, and the answer changes depending on each iteration of Thomas. So, let's talk about it. I think it might be pretty obvious that the narrator for the Railway series is the Reverend Wilbert Awdry himself. In the second book of the series, Thomas the Tank Engine, Wilbert writes to his son Christopher directly in the first-person perspective and tells the story of Thomas the Tank Engine. So that not only makes him the narrator of this story and every other one he wrote, but also means his fictionalized version of himself, who goes under the alias The Thin Clergyman, wrote them too within the universe of the Railway series. And it makes sense that that would be the case. The lore of the Railway series is very meta, so anything that happens or will happen in real life also happens in the Railway series, including the series itself. Throughout the Railway series, the Thin Clergyman makes a few cameo appearances here and there, and has a main role in two stories. One of them includes him and Teddy Boston, aka the Fat Clergyman, where Bert the miniature engine gets splashed by them accidentally when they visit, and pays Teddy back by splashing him with water. It wouldn't be unrealistic to assume that the Thin Clergyman, within the fictional world of the Railway series, would use this as inspiration for his book for small railway engines. I mean, one of the reasons he was there was to get photos of them. The same can be applied to the Duke the Lost Engine story, Sleeping Beauty. Both of these stories could very well be written from Wilbert's perspective, as he was present for both of them, even if he doesn't write the story from a first-person perspective. But that does beg the question, how did the Thin Clergyman hear of the other stories on Sodor that he was not present for? I'm not sure exactly. I don't know how the Thin Clergyman managed to get word of these stories, as I doubt he was present for each story that happened. If he was around Sodor during the events of the Three Railway Engines, for example, which takes place between 1922 and 1923, he would have been around 11 or 12 years old, and we'd also have to consider the fact that this would mean the Thin Clergyman either lived on Sodor or visited it super frequently as a child, which I don't think is the case. Instead, I believe it has to do with him being a public relations officer. According to Indeed, a PRO, as I'll be referring to them as, is someone who manages the identity and brand of a person or organization, in this case the Northwestern Railway. PROs typically help with the distribution and writing of whatever they're working for, which is likely the reason the Thin and Fat Clergyman came to the Arlesdale Railway, as they had visited to photograph the engines for Wilbert's book of them to help spread the stories and ongoings of Sodor. Or him being a PRO is completely irrelevant to him visiting the Arlesdale, and he just wanted to get photos for his book. I don't know, man. It would make sense though, I think. His status as a PRO is to distribute and write stuff of things happening on Sodor, so him visiting the Arlesdale would make sense if he wanted to do that. Anyway, I don't think this means the illustrations are meant to be his photographs, because there's no way he could get shots like this, and he likely wouldn't have been old enough to be visiting Sodor around the time of these photos. but rather used them as reference for the illustrations, which could also be the explanation for a handful of other illustrations that are directly based on real photos. A photo like this one, used as reference for this illustration, could have existed within the Railway series universe, but with the actual character used within the photo, and was then illustrated for the Thin Clergyman's book. I think I made that sound a lot more convoluted than it actually is. Like, imagine this image, okay? But Bear is actually there and exists in real life, and then a photo is drawn for Wilbert's book of him. Okay? Okay. I think what's most likely is that he might have heard of the stories of Sodor the same way he did in real life, from reading about them in a train article, history book, and or from a newspaper, and used the events of the story for his books. There's no way the stuff that happens on Sodor doesn't stay on Sodor. Something like an engine falling down a mine or getting entrapped in a tunnel is bound to reach other places in the UK. So, in other words, the stories of the Railway series in-universe are retellings of events that happened in it. Hi. I somehow forgot to mention this, but in a few forewords for the Railway series like the ones you see here on screen, Wilbert writes them as if the Northwestern Railway and Sodor in general actually exists in the real world and treats the people and engines like they're speaking to him directly. So, there's that, and I also just realized there's likely two of almost the exact same thing or accident that has happened on Sodor that's also happened off it at some point, possibly at different times of course, but I thought that was interesting. This hurt my brain trying to wrap my head around the logic of it, but I think that's a solid enough explanation for who the narrator for Wilbert's run of the Railway series is. The same can be said for Christopher's run of the series too. Christopher, in Really Useful Engines, refers to his father in the foreword in the first person again, and mentions how he still has an interest in the region's affairs, written as if Sodor is a real place, and as such writes as if it's in universe within it. Christopher's Railway series counterpart likely heard of the events of some of the things that happened on Sodor the same way his father's counterpart did, or from his father himself at the time, as a few of the events that happen in the stories did in fact happen in real life, the most notable example being Sir Handel's visit to the Telethon Railway and the accident at it where he had to wear an eye patch. So, that answers it. The narrator for the Railway series is whoever the author is, and it's told from their fictionalized counterparts' perspectives. Makes sense. But what about the TV series? Well, this isn't technically the TV series yet, but in Shining Time Station, the stories of Sodor are told from the perspective of Mr. Conductor. In Shining Time, the universe Thomas and his friends live in is treated like a magical island that can be traveled to with the help of gold dust.
This is the island of Sodor, where Thomas and his friends live. It's at one end of my special universe.
So, if you've seen Thomas and the Magic Railroad, you're likely already familiar with that. Mr. Conductor tells the stories of Thomas and his friends to anyone interested, and whoever Mr. Conductor is in the season is the same one who narrates the story. So Ringo Starr, who was the narrator in the UK but plays the role of Mr. Conductor in Shining Time Station, narrates the story like he's actually telling it to his audience with US Railway terminology rather than UK ones. The same applies with the second Mr. Conductor, who's played by George Carlin. Thomas and the Magic Railroad is also told from Mr. Conductor's perspective, who's played by Alec Baldwin, who also narrated Season 5 and 6. Unlike the former two, however, Shining Time Station had ended when it was time for Alec Baldwin to narrate for the series. But if we were to take into consideration that the narrations for those seasons are told the same way the other conductors told them, like to an audience at the station, then it could be assumed that the stories Alec narrates for those seasons are being told from Mr. Conductor's perspective. So, before the events of Thomas and the Magic Railroad, he was telling stories of a big, cranky crane, 3 horrid lorries, and George the steamroller just wreaking havoc on the island. So, that's also very easily explained. It's more blatant than it is in the Railway series since the live-action segments lead into the stories, for the first 2 conductors at least. The only inconsistency there is with Junior. Junior takes on the role of Mr. Conductor at the end of Thomas and the Magic Railroad, yet none of the stories told after it are told by him or his actor, Michael E. Rogers. Although, even if they aren't narrated by him in Season 6, I think it could be assumed he told other kids the same stories the same kind of way. And I, for one, would love to hear them. I want to hear about that party popper prank that he pulled on Thomas.
You stuffed party poppers down my funnel.
Hey, we had a laugh.
You did.
Okay, cool, but what about, like, the show? Not including Shine Time Station. Well, this is where it gets way less meta. The narrator in the TV series is just a disembodied voice. There's no real character behind it, they're not someone you're meant to put much thought into, they just exist. You gotta accept it. The world of Thomas throughout the TV series isn't meant to be treated as if it's a real place, unlike the Railway series. Real locations do exist or are mentioned in it, mostly throughout the CGI era, but in the classic series, the mainland and other locations are usually omitted, like with the scrapyard Oliver was found in during Season 3. In the Railway series, this takes place on the mainland, whereas in the show it's at Vickerstown, and how Stepney works on a branch line on Sodor rather than his own line of origin in real life. Because of this, the show isn't written as if we're hearing the story from someone else's perspective. The narrator has no deeper meaning or characteristic aside from just telling the story. Although, there are a few occasions where they do speak to the listener directly. In the Railway series, when the reader is questioned directly, it can be assumed it's Wilbert/the Thin Clergyman or whoever the author is speaking to us or maybe someone else directly. However, in the TV series, the narrator is a lot more ambiguous.
But I think he deserved his punishment. Don't you?
Is he talking to me? Who is he? Does he know I exist? Does the narrator know I exist? The engines do seem to acknowledge the narrator's existence, however. The only time this is alluded to is in Reds vs. Blues, where Percy says the ever so iconic line, and then there
was trouble.
Yeah, sure, whatever. Steal my thunder, I don't care. Something only the narrator says, which means the engines know of the saying and likely could have only heard it from them. But again, whoever this could be is unknown. There are also a few moments where the narrator actually reacts to what's happening on screen, like in this scene from A Shed for Edward where he lets out a gasp when a sleep-deprived Edward passes some red signals.
Then there was trouble.
And in the climax for Tale of the Brave where this rock falls into the tracks.
Percy had to move back to get away from the danger. Then there was trouble.
So that implies the narrator is watching everything unfold in real time rather than retelling the story and knowing the outcome, or he's doing it for dramatic effect. You're not making this easy for me. The Thin Clergyman does exist in the CGI era, along with the Fat Clergyman, but the Railway series does in fact exist within it too, as mentioned by the Queen of England in Thomas and the Royal Engine.
Well, Sir Topham, from what my son has been reading in the books written about it, your Northwestern Railway is well known for helping out those in need.
So the Thin Clergyman does still write the books, but unlike the Railway series, none of the events that happen in this era are from a specific person's perspective, and as such, the narrator just doesn't have a character. That is, until the Big World Big Adventures rebrand, where every episode is now narrated by Thomas. The respective voice actor of Thomas for whatever country you're from retells the events of the episodes in this era from his perspective, speaking in the first person when referring to himself.
One day, when I was working on the Chinese railway, I was running a little late. It was my first day on the Indian Railway, and everything was new to me. I was working in the Australian outback pulling goods trains when I was surprised by an old friend.
Look out for that dingo!
And, I think that answers all of that. As a recap, the narrator in the universe of the Railway series is the author of whoever is writing the stories. So Wilbur Audrey's fictionalized version of himself in his run, and Christopher's for his, Shining Time Station's narrators are all of their respective Mr. Conductors, likely including Junior, and the Big World Big Adventure era has Thomas narrating the stories, all of them being told from their own perspectives in some way, shape, or form. The other narrators, like Michael Brandon, Michael Angelis, etc., are still up in the air as to who they are in terms of narrators within the universe of Thomas, but as mentioned before, their roles as narrators were likely not as fleshed out the same way as the others were, since they're just there to tell a story and not have any more thought put into them than that. But based on a few moments from Mark Morgan's narrations, it sounds like the narrator is simply a disembodied voice that a few characters could be aware of, who also has enough of a personality to react to things happening. Very, tedious Tales of Sodor-esque kinda, but I think the engines aren't actually aware of him. Maybe except Percy? I don't know. I could be very wrong about all of this, and I'm just thinking way too much into a disembodied voice of the person telling the stories of brightly colored trains with faces, but that's the conclusion I've come to. And if you think I'm stupid for it, that's what I thought. I would absolutely love to see if they actually end up bringing a narrator back with this new reboot and if they'll tell the story in a unique perspective. But so far, the leaks that are coming out of this new show, if they're meant to be trusted, doesn't seem to imply that there is a narrator yet. I think it could be really interesting to hear the stories from Ollie's perspective, a child from the Thomas's Brave Adventure book who's a train enthusiast, assuming he's going to be a main character in the show if the book we got earlier is anything to go off of. But we'll just have to wait and see. This was a much shorter video than I usually like to make, but this was such an interesting thought, I had to make a video on it. I am still working on that iceberg, and another video that's also in the works, but I figured this would be nice to have on here so my channel isn't completely radio silent. I am really sorry for the long wait among videos. I'm still getting used to running a channel again after years without uploading, and I've got really bad procrastination problems. Anyway, I'll see you guys whenever. I don't know. I gotta get back into Fortnite. They had Pomni, dude. Oh, and Jax too, I guess. Wait, does that mean the Island of Sodor lore book, the Reading Between the Lines one, and the lectures are basically just history books in the universe of the Railway series? Weird. Oh well.